What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Home Built Workshop. Today we're going to solve somewhat of a router bit storage problem using a piece of wood that sort of looks like a fish and some 3D printed inserts. Stick around, check it out. Well, it does kind of look like a fish. He's just full of holes. One thing that I think we as woodworkers tend to accumulate over time are router bits. Router bits come in all shapes, sizes, profiles, different shank sizes. You definitely don't want these things just thrown in a drawer where they can roll around, bang into each other. You don't want to damage that cutting edge. So it's important to store these things in a secure way. That's exactly the situation I'm in right now. I've got a handful of router bits. Some are 1/4" shank, some are 1/2" shank, and I need some sort of simple solution to store both of them. Now, there are some online retailers where you can buy little inserts that will hold both size router bits, but what fun is that? I made my own. I spent some time and designed these little inserts to hold both a 1/2" shank as well as a 1/4" shank router bit, and this is what we're going to use. Another thing I spent a lot of time doing was overthinking this whole entire project. I spent a ton of time trying to figure out the coolest way I could lay this out, or what was going to be the most decorative looking thing. We're not going that route. I found this scrap piece that I think is going to work perfect. We can do some sort of abstract type of pattern, but first we got to fix this rotten bit up here. This piece of elm has deteriorated really badly, so we're going to fix this with some epoxy. Using some house wrap tape, I'm just going to seal up all the cracks as best I can. On the front side, I'm going to use the tape to make kind of a little dam that's going to contain the epoxy. I think that's going to work good. Really nothing fancy, just sealed up the bottom so that when we pour the epoxy in, it doesn't just ooze all over the table, because that makes a mess. Since my 3D printed pieces are green, I thought it'd be cool to add some green pigment to the epoxy. And now I'll just start dumping in the epoxy, making sure to fill all the cracks and crevices. Let's hope we don't spring a leak. Once the epoxy is poured and the cracks are filled, I'll use a heat gun to help draw out the air bubbles so there's no voids in the epoxy. And based on most of my previous experience pouring any quantities of epoxy, it sprung a leak. So I had to try to quickly patch it up using some extra pieces of tape. I don't see any more leaks. I think we're good. I'm going to spend the next half hour or so keeping an eye on this, hitting it with the heat gun, refilling if necessary, and fixing some leaks if any more sprout up. Well, our epoxy is dried, but honestly, that whole process could have gone a little smoother. I spent about 30 minutes monitoring this and using the heat gun to get any bubbles out, and everything seemed to be going just fine, so I left it to cure. When I came back several hours later, the epoxy had run all over the table. Apparently we sprung a bad leak, and when I lifted this up off of the table, it pulled a chunk of the table up. So we're gonna have to fix our poor table. But before we can move on, I gotta clean this up. I think I'm just gonna sand it smooth, and then we can move on to this process. Honestly, I don't know if we're gonna be able to save this. There's epoxy all over the sides. I don't know what happened, but things went awry. Let's clean this up first. Why is it every time I do something with epoxy? Yeah. I don't know. Well, I was able to get the table as well as my scraper cleaned up pretty good. Unfortunately, the table's got a big hole here where the wood has been ripped out, but that's a repair for another day. Right now, I need to work on getting this piece flattened out, cleaned up, and see what kind of mess we have here. Now I'm going to use this sled to flatten this out. I'll attach this piece here with some hot glue. We'll flatten it out on the drum sander, just like I did in a recent video. I'll put a link right up here if you want to see exactly how I do it. We'll go to this process a little bit more in depth, but I'm going to use the exact same techniques. Poor fish-shaped board. He's covered in epoxy. He's a mess. I can't even get all the tape off. There's so much epoxy leaked through these layers that this is kind of like one blob of tape, so I hope the drum sander will just take it off. Fingers crossed, into the drum sander we go. I've got 40 grit paper loaded in the drum sander. I'm hoping that the coarse grit will just chew away that excess epoxy. Cleaned up really good. I think we're good to move on. There is a lot of epoxy still on the sides, so I want to try to remove some of that and see if I can get back at least to most of the live edge. So now I'm ready to start laying out where I need to drill a bunch of 5/8 holes for these inserts to get pressed into. I'm not going to do any sort of pattern or anything like that. I'm just going to do kind of a random placement, but I want them all to be at least an inch apart. I'm going to kind of just pick a spot for the first one and just kind of randomly place them where I think I like the look. I went back and forth on how I was going to lay these out. I was going to originally try to lay them out nice and evenly spaced, but really I think since we're working with this wonky shaped piece of wood, this random spacing is going to be just kind of cool. There's a hole in the bottom of these inserts which allows for any dust and dirt to fall through and to prevent any vacuum when you're inserting a router bit, but it also lets me mark the location using a pencil. Now I'll just use a 5/8 inch Forstner bit to drill all of the holes that I just laid out. And now we're ready for a coat of finish. I really like how the epoxy just pops as soon as you hit it with the finish. It just looks cool. And while we give this some time to dry, let's take a look at these inserts. So here's one of the inserts right here. This one is fresh off the 3D printer, ready to be installed in our holder, but this is designed to work with 3/4 inch or thicker material. It's just a shade under 3/4 of an inch. So if you drill a through hole, this will go all the way through the stock. It's made to work with basically off-the-shelf material or whatever you have around. There's two different size holes on the inside. One of them will hold a standard 1/2 inch shank router bit, and it holds it nice and secure. Then on the inside is a smaller recess to hold a 1/4 inch shank bit. Holds it securely as well. So you can use this to mount vertical, horizontal, or anywhere in between, and it'll hold your bits nice and solid. So to install them, all you have to do is drill a 5/8 hole. I like to use a Forstner bit because it's nice and clean and the edges are nice and square. But you just drive that down in there, and you can make any sort of router bit holder that you need to that will accommodate both size bits. On the outside of this, there are some grooves, and those grooves are meant to help hold glue if you need to use any sort of glue, but it just gives a little bit of a biting edge to kind of help hold the insert into your piece of wood. I'm going to make the STL file available for free to those of you that may want to download it, print it out on your own 3D printer. I would recommend doing a test piece first. Due to variations in different 3D printers, you may need to adjust the size a little bit in your modeling software, but I'm printing these on a Creality Ender 3 version 2 with just the factory settings. I haven't done any sort of modifications to any of the firmware or anything like that. It's basically completely a stock machine, and I've calibrated it to work exactly with that. So links in the description if you want the STL files. Also, I'm going to make these available for sale on my website where I can print these out, and you guys can just make your own holder if you choose to go that route. Hit up my website, homebuiltworkshop.com. Click the little store button at the top. You can get these little guys. Let's install them. the very last minute, I decided to add some keyhole style hangers on the back. Originally, I was planning to just screw this to the wall with some regular screws, but I decided I didn't want the screws visible, so I quickly modeled up some hangers that fit into a 3/4 inch hole. These holes don't go all the way through, they only need to be about a 1/2 inch deep. I'll make this file available as well to anyone that wants it. Now we can just load this up with our favorite bits. Now I'm ready to hang this thing on the wall, or if you have the space, you could just have it sit on your table or your workbench or whatever you needed. I'm just going to secure it with some screws in a safe space where you can't bump into it because, well, that would hurt. So thanks a lot for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this little project. I know this is going to make a big difference in the way that I store some of these bits. It's going to keep them safe, secure, out of the way, keep them from getting damaged. Hope maybe this gives you some ideas of some ways you might be able to store some of your router bits. Thanks a lot for watching. We'll see you next time. I think it's very important that you spill epoxy right on your table. Not really, but I always do it. This really stinks. See a little bug?